Okay, so this is section 4. We'll go through the XpressConnect enrollment system. We'll jump through some slides, set it up from scratch. Again, I'm Kevin Koster. I'm founder and CEO at Cloudpath Networks. We call the product the XpressConnect enrollment system, and we kind of phrase it as, we're enabling capabilities and services through certificates for all users, all devices. Kind of parsing through that, one of the key words we use there is enablement. And you'll very rarely hear us say management. We can distinguish, we separate that from enablement. So when we're talking about personal devices, we want to enable them to do things without having to have, for example, an onboard agent manage that device. We think that's a model that just doesn't fit well with the personal device route. And the idea of enablement came, as we worked with service providers, kind of how they work, right? Like you buy an iPhone, you take 30 seconds, you activate it. From then on, you're never prompted for your password on 3G, 4G. At the same time, the service provider knows who you are. They know what the device is. They know what services and capabilities you've signed up for on the back end. They just know how the network should work for you. We don't have SIM cards and so forth, so we do the same sort of thing with certificates. Take the certificate, burn it in the device, and then all users, all devices goes back to the, the two kind of assumptions in 802.1x, which is it was for managed devices and managed users, people in AD and LDAP. We want to break down both of those, be able to use it both for AD, LDAP users as well as undefined users, and also, not just IT assets, but also personal and unmanaged devices. So in terms of certificate capabilities in the system, earlier you'd asked about how we can mix and match certificates from different sources. So yes, we do have built-in certificate infrastructure. You'll see it in a few minutes what it takes to initialize the system. We get it up and running. The great thing about having an onboard certificate infrastructure is we can sort of do anything we want with it, right? There's no preconceived notions of how things have to work or definition around requirements and so forth. So for example, with the interop Las Vegas and New York situation, it's a hotspot. We don't really care who the user is. We just want to have them accept some terms and conditions, get on the network. We'd much rather put them on a secure, encrypted network than leave them on an open SSID. So they click, they're provisioned a certificate, and from then on, they're able to join the secure SSID using that certificate. At the same time, we've always focused on standards. So, while we have certificate infrastructure on hand, we also want to work with third parties. So, we can do kind of any third party via REST APIs, but the really simple ones, Microsoft CA. We have this really cool plugin for DLL that you throw on a web server joined to your domain, and it allows us to bridge into Microsoft CA the proper way. And I'll go into what I mean by proper here in a second. But at the end of the day, we're going to put a unique device certificate on each a unique certificate on each device so we can control it individually. As we get into the workflow engine, I'll show you how we can mix and match sources. So we can create one branch that terminates with the user moving to an SSID, pulling a certificate from Microsoft CA, and another branch that terminates with pulling a certificate from the onboard CA. It's with our onboarding piece is what we've traditionally called the wizard. That's the workhorse that allows the system to work. Because if we built the server components, it just wouldn't be that interesting because you'd still be stuck at how do I get certificates on the devices? How do I make sure users aren't struggling getting on the network? How do I avoid IT overhead? And so it really becomes possible because of that ability to automatically get the certificate on the device, and then also to manage the life cycle of it. So
Kevin, let me interrupt you for a minute. It just dawned on me. In the world of PEEP, in your onboarding, one of the things that we've seen using Cloudpath is that with the later versions of OS X and Windows 7, they can just do the auto configure, just basically bypass needing to onboard through Cloudpath. And they get on without trusting the certs and all of that, and it just works. This puts an end to that.
So we can certainly mix and match with PEEP. So if you want to leave that, particularly during a transition period, you certainly can.
Yeah, to rephrase, this can put an end to
this. This can put an end to this. And that's what we saw was click to join is nice for making it work. It's not nice for protecting the network. Some of that's security related, not trusting certificates, ignoring all that. On the other hand, legal things like acceptable use policies and so forth. How do you keep someone off your PEEP network if they're able to click to join? If you need a EULA. Other situations are like NAC. So we've always had NAC functionality. So, at the same time we can install third-party NAC products so you get constant monitoring. But traditionally we've said, if you need persistent NAC, you need a third-party agent, we'll take care of all the details, we'll mask that from the user. If you just want to sanity check that device and get it to a clean state before it ever hits the network the first time, we can do that. There were kind of two limitations to that model. Was one, we couldn't ensure that every device went through XpressConnect, and so they could configure on their own and not have their firewall turned on, just like they turn off server cert validation and so forth. The second one was we couldn't, short of like resetting their password, we couldn't force them to go back through that on a regular basis. So we might have one-time opportunity to get them clean. With certificates, we can control that. So we can say, hey, to get a certificate, you've got to meet my NAC policies. So XpressConnect, if we don't see a firewall, we'll turn it on. If we don't see AV, we can provide you a message that you should install it and a button to install it, and that'll, behind the scenes, we'll suck it down and install it for them. And so once they get that certificate, we know they're in a good state. And so we can do that one time only, when they first enroll, but we can also enforce that over time, either on a per individual basis. So you registered on September 1st, you've got 6 months until you have to go through NAC again. Or we can do it on a community basis. So we can say, during the summer, all my certificates expire. So instead of saying, I'm going to issue my certificates for 1 year, I'm going to say, I'm going to issue my certificates until July 1. And so then as students come back, we know that they have to re-enroll. Another cool thing is we can be on a local SSID or on the web in general. So you don't have to wait for them to show up and get on the open SSID to do it. You can fire them off an email during the summer. In fact, we have automated notifications. So as their certificate expires on July 1, we can, behind the scenes, fire them off emails saying, hey, your certificate's going to expire in a couple days. Click here to re-enroll for the fall semester. So all those sort of things go together to say, without putting agents on the device, without throwing a lot of hardware on the network to try to sniff traffic to figure out who they are, what they're doing, whether they're bad, we can kind of enforce that. And then it complements other systems. So if you have an IPS system and you see a machine misbehaving, in the Radius, in PEEP world, you could go to the Radius server, figure out who that user was. You might be able to block their MAC address, or you might block, disable their user account, which then affected all their devices. In the certificate realm, you can say, boom, I want that device. I want that device off. We revoke it, and now they're gone.
Kevin, can I, through Cloudpath, all my students are going to expire at January or July 1st date. Can there be a time setting in Cloudpath to where it would, uninstall the certs and put them back on that enroll SSID by default? Instead of just having the TLS no longer work, they automatically have that enroll SSID put back in that profile.
We don't like to leave. There's some things we can do to sort of mimic it, but we don't like leaving things on their system. That is sort of one of our mindsets from the very beginning when we were initially we were trying to get rid of these supplicants that ripped and replaced the whole network stack. And we just saw, there's certain things that are nice about having an on-device agent that can do, like that sort of thing that says, okay, your certificate's expired. Today, we don't have that local piece that could say that. We see email and SMS as being that communication channel where we can say, you can set up multiple to say, hey, in 7 days, your cert's going to expire. Okay, you haven't re-enrolled. Okay, in 4 days left. 3 days left, 2 days left, and then they get down to the end, you send them another email saying, hey, you're off the network. So it becomes more of a communication issue and really an ability to re-enroll them proactively rather than waiting for things to fail.
And is that email service, is that part of Cloudpath as well?
Yeah, so we can do email, SMS. It's bound to how they enroll. And so if you do like click to join, obviously we don't have email and SMS. We can't send you a notification. But if you're doing AD, we can pull that email out of AD. If you're doing, sometimes AD will also have phone number in it. Not normally in a university scenario, but if you're doing self-verification through SMS, we'll get the SMS address. We've also had people that like the SMS notification route, so they authenticate through AD. They authenticate through AD first, and then they split their workflow and put some rules in place that say, if it looks like a laptop, go this way. Or I'm sorry, if it's a laptop, go this way, and just get them on. If it looks like a phone, go this way. Prompt the user for a phone number. May be required, may be optional, but just as a mechanism, hey, we'd like to be able to notify you if your network connectivity is going to change. Give us your phone number and we can do that. And so then that gets rolled up into their enrollment record, and then that becomes the basis we can notify them on.
Cool, thank you.
And there's sort of three areas of notification issuance. So we can say, hey, the day they enroll, 1 hour, 10 minutes after they enroll, whatever the case may be, the next day, fire them off an email, reminding them of the use policy, any other information, hey, welcome to, here's support website, or here's a list of applications that may be useful, whatever you need to communicate to a new user. The second one, revocation. And so if you want to, you can certainly make it silent. So you revoke them, they just don't know, it just goes away. At the same time, if you want to give them a heads up, we can do that. So, hey, you've been revoked. Don't expect your device to work any longer. You modify it depending on how you're making those decisions. So if you're seeing bad traffic, say, hey, you've been compromised, or whatever you want to communicate to the user. And then, in some cases that may be just go back and re-enroll. And during re-enroll, we'll sanity check some stuff. We'll make sure they have AV and whatnot. Other cases it may be, it's really a support ticket. It's a compromised machine or something. So a few gotchas here with Microsoft CA that I want to point out. And I should rephrase that. It's not gotchas with Microsoft CA. Microsoft CA is a great system. It's with how people interact with it. And so from the perspective of educated customers, I just want to call these out because we get pulled in trying to kind of after these get to the point of the aha moment. So one thing to understand is with Microsoft CA, the SCEP implementation in Microsoft CA is called Indes. It was very much designed with the idea that you were doing switches and routers, but they did put in enough flags and whatnot to really be able to extend it out to other use cases. The key thing there is all those certificates get assigned to SCEP admin. And so when you get into looking at onboard CA versus Microsoft CA, there's pros and cons both ways. Guest users always onboard CA. IT assets, if you have Microsoft CA, normally are on the Microsoft CA side. And then BYOD users go both ways, just depending on kind of the level of access you want to give them, or how you want to treat it, or how certain you are you have your Microsoft CA kind of correctly separated. So with SCEP, so the real benefit to putting it in Microsoft CA is it goes into Active Directory. It's your normal user management procedures. When your domain machines join the network and get a certificate, and you as a user get a certificate, it goes under your user account. With Indes, because they assume that it was an administrator provisioning the device for a router or a switch situation, they just dumped them all in SCEP admin. And so now you've lost all your benefit to really managing them in AD. You've got this big bucket list of certificates issued to SCEP admin to go sort through to try to find which one's Bob. And so at the end of the day, it really defeats the purpose of using Active Directory for the certificates. So be aware of that. And I'll talk to our solution that resolves that in a minute. The idea that pulling an intermediate CA from Microsoft CA, that's not integrating. That's just pulling an intermediate CA from Microsoft CA or from any CA. And in some cases with Microsoft CA it can be dangerous because now you've created this intermediate CA that if your domain hasn't been designed to accommodate this kind of unknown CA that's issuing certificates on other policies, those are still getting trusted on the domain. When Microsoft CA works properly, it knows who the user is, it knows what certificates it's given to the user, it knows that when that user, their user account's locked, that means their certificate should be locked too. Or when the user's deleted, all that sort of thing. And as soon as you start decoupling it, either by putting it in SCAP-admin or sucking it out to a different system and issuing certificates via that trust chain, you're creating a mess, and you may have unintended consequences. As I touched on earlier, don't issue the same certificate to every device. Using one certificate to all devices is not using certificates, from the way we talk about things. And then a big one is don't enable this flag. This is a huge release from Microsoft, just saying do not, they've very adamantly said do not use this flag. And then under there they start backing down and saying, okay, if you have to use this flag, don't make it an enterprise CA, make it a standalone CA. So they've said, okay, now carve it off and treat it completely separate from AD, don't put it in AD, all this stuff. And so what this flag does is this allows an external caller to send in the subject name for the certificate, so the common name information. And so this allows an external system to say, I'm issuing a certificate through Indes under SCAP-admin, but I really want that certificate called bob@company.com. And as Microsoft details, if there's anything wrong with your environment, that essentially allows anybody to impersonate anybody as they're requesting certificates within your domain. So I touched on a little bit earlier, we have this product called an integration module, and it's really the root of where we started in TLS. Back in 2007, we had our first customer doing TLS, and that time they had their own CA, and we added some more over time, and they had their own CAs, and then we ran into a few Microsoft CA situations, and we realized, we came across some of these issues, and we realized that we had this opportunity to just drop in a DLL, make it really easy, eliminate all these concerns. And so we created this integration module for Microsoft CA. And so we had this option, you could buy the wizard to do PEEP or TTLS, or you could buy the wizard plus the integration module to do TLS. That's now evolved into the ES. And so what we saw was, to really do certificates right, to do multiple policies, not just tie it to user information, we needed this DLL. And so that's available as part of the enrollment system. And so if you're doing Microsoft CA, we'll plug that in and it'll just work. I'm gonna speed up a little bit or I'm gonna run out of time. I wanna make sure I spend plenty of time in the demo. Key idea in the enrollment system is that there's a workflow. There's about a dozen different types of building blocks that you can build that workflow out. And so there's no preconceived notion of who your users are or how you're gonna treat them. One of the things we saw was that anytime you show the user multiple options and they don't qualify for one, they assume that one's better and they want to be on that SSID or they want to go down that route, and then they start asking why can't I go that way? So it's better just to make those options go away. And so we build out this workflow. Again, I'll go into the details when we're in the product, but visitor side, you can do anything you normally do in a sponsorship situation or a guest server situation. You can build out as many branches as you want. And usually on day one, as I walk through the demo, you'll see this. Day one, it's fairly simple. Day two, some corner case comes up on the network. So instead of creating a separate process, you just go plug it in. And the idea is that we want to create this one location where, as IT, you can say, regardless of your user, regardless of what device you have, go to onboard SSID or go to onboard.company.com. Click through the screens, and it'll get you on, and it'll do that, taken into who you are, device, all that sort of information. And so tomorrow, when you decide, okay, I'm not just doing BYOD, but I'm also going to do guest users, you don't have to communicate that to people. You just plug it in. Now there's additional options. If you want to expand your guest users from one bucket to 2 buckets, like this case with sponsored versus unsponsored, you just go in and create the branch and click the snapshot and it's published and you're off and running.
So do you see a lot of people willing to have that additional SSID overhead for the onboarding, or do you see more people using the guest SSID with an option for onboarding off of that?
B. So we call it onboard SSID just to like separate it from, is it guest, is it my old SSID that I'm turning off, or what exactly it is. So we use the onboard SSID. We used to call it the help SSID. Just whatever SSID you have in your environment, and this goes back to behavior. And this goes back to day one of Cloudpath. We knew that when a user's not on the network, they go finding one, and we want to be wherever they're going to go. Right? So hopefully it's not Starbucks, but hopefully it's one of your SSIDs, and if you name it properly and so forth, you can do that. And then guest SSID, boom, there it is. There's a couple different options when you put on a guest SSID. If you want to keep handling guests the way you always have, you can certainly leave that stuff there. Just put a link in there saying, hey, we recommend moving to secure. And this is how we moved universities to security. Is political pressure. You couldn't say, hey, tomorrow we're going to turn off open and turn on secure. At the same time, there's long track record of saying, well, if you turn on open and you turn on secure, no one's going to be on secure except your buddies, like the 50 people that came that you convinced to get on. And so we saw even when people ran WPA to enterprise, they had very low adoption rates, whereas our customers have very high adoption rates of secure SSID. And part of that's kind of the behavior aspect. So we go back to whatever page they're normally going to see. Now we change that message to say, hey, we recommend moving to secure wireless. Click here to do so. So part of it's messaging, get it in front of the user, give them the option. Second part is it has to be highly reliable and easy, because if it takes too long or it's too difficult, they're going to opt out and go back to where they were. But the beauty of it is once we get them on, they're on. Right? So during the first couple weeks of school at a university, we'll see 70 to 80% of students just voluntarily move over, which just changes the dynamics of politics. Now all of a sudden you have 80% of your users on secure. Now you let it run for another semester. Now you're by holiday break you're up around 90% or so. Now it's a whole different game what you want to do with your open SSID. First, you have a lot less devices there. So if you want to continue using kind of heavy methods to monitor that and protect it, that's certainly feasible. If you want to turn it off, we've had universities just say, no, we're turning off open SSID other than using it for onboarding, but in terms of web in general. Or if you want to just say, hey, the open SSID is available, but there's not Facebook there. But if you want Facebook, it's over on secure SSID, all those sort of things. So I'm gonna skip over these last few slides just so we can get into the demo. Someone asked about Google Glass last night.
I wonder who that was.
It's not officially supported yet, but that's a screen from it. Okay, so the first time you boot up, so the enrollment system's available in two forms. It's available as a local VM. That's what I'm running here on a Mac Mini. We need a lot of horsepower for CA, so Mac Mini works perfect, I guess. I'm kidding there. That's my disproving of one of the misnomers, and I'll get into that later, is that it needs a lot of horsepower. The other one is it's available in the cloud. So our name predates Cloudpath or cloud computing. We were really creating a path to the network back when the cloud was just a geeky term for network. Since then, cloud computing got coined, and now there's all sorts of confusion. At the same time, yes, we do play in the cloud space, but we've actually, I think, created really neat models around blending what's in the cloud and what's what's available locally. And today, when you look at controllers, they sort of mimic the type of behavior we had with the enrollment system, where, yeah, we had components in the cloud, but you didn't rely on them. The things you relied on were local. So the first time you boot up the enrollment system, get a nice little welcome message here. There's a licensing server. Normally this is sitting out in the cloud. In this case, I have it here locally, so I got to swap out this URL and then go ahead and log into the licensing server. And at this point, it'll pull down license information and whatnot. So it's going to walk through some steps here, just initializing the system. And so next several steps is initializing the system, and I'll make sure I point out before we start doing workflow type stuff. Just going to ask for some information about the company. It's got a little cheater bar down here for demos to populate it, so I use that.
Does that populate forward into the certificate authority info?
You'll see in a minute. It's much less intimidating if we ask for it in that manner, if we just ask you for address and whatnot. If we say, hey, we're creating a certificate, people lock up. Oh my goodness, like legal name, I don't know. That'll become the defaults. You can certainly change it later on, but we'll default it there. We use the company name and the URL in places just so we can do multi-tenant type stuff. And so we just need a URL safe name. DNS, don't try running systems anymore without proper DNS and without proper web certificate. There's just too many OSs. Every OS is starting to behave, every browser is starting to have different characteristics. They fail in different ways. They crash in different ways. Captive portals cause issues when they start to do certificate verification and stuff. And so just have a proper certificate and whatnot, and we try to make it as easy as possible. So we just need a DNS. We'll go ahead and bind it to an AD. Most people, you can certainly, there's options down here lower where you can do LDAP and radius. This is just in the initial setup because most people want at least one radius server or one directory service. You can create as many as you need to. That's one of the cool things is since we're doing branching, we know exactly where we want to authenticate to. We don't have to say, okay, I got five different systems. I got to fire the password against 5 systems and let them all fail and before I figure it out. And we'll test my typing skills here to see if I can fill this all out without any typos. We know what happens with passwords, right? Okay, so that's the information we need about Active Directory. Our preference is to bind as the user with Active Directory. We're able to do that and get everything we need. If you expanded the LDAP, you'd also have like bind credentials, the things you'd expect to see. I hate onboard accounts. I hate creating username and passwords on systems. So we can just right from the get-go say, yes, this system's able to use AD. We can do group regex and so forth to figure it out so you don't put username and passwords on this system. We can decide whether or not we use this for sponsorship. This is kind of separate from actually setting up sponsorship, which I'll go to later, but we'll go ahead and leave this on for sponsorship. And just to make sure I didn't typo anything, we'll go ahead and do a test authentication. In this case, I'm doing LDAP. We support LDAP S2, and at this point, if you're doing LDAP S, we'd check server certs and all that stuff and help you get it all set up correctly. Like I said, don't run systems anymore without proper certificates. If you need to, just go to thought by a wildcard certificate just for IT use. Keep it internal, have it available to put on systems. Otherwise, you'll waste a lot of time just troubleshooting, not just in our system, just in general. Weird browser behaviors there. They're getting much more strict on it. And it's not as obvious as it used to be when you could just click through and whatnot. So here I'm setting up our web server cert. In this case, I have one that I pre-generated. If you needed to generate a CSR and all that stuff, it'd take care of it and it'd just walk you through the process. Okay, so now we're getting into the interesting stuff. So here we're going to create our certificate authorities. We have our default information from those friendly screens earlier. By default, we prefer to set up a root and intermediate. Later on, you can add as many as you want. You can go as deep as you want, as wide as you want. But in this initial setup, we just kind of push it towards best practice with a single root and the intermediate off of it. So we'll go ahead and accept that. We'll go ahead and turn on the local radius server. Like I said, you certainly use an existing radius server. To do that, you just take the certificate authority public key, copy it over there, set it up as a trusted CA over there. As the certificate comes in, it'll match it up with that CA certificate. In there's the OCSP URL, so on the back end, it'll know where to call us to verify that that's still valid. We'll go ahead and just generate a certificate off of our local CA to put on the radio server. One of the cool things is once you're in the TLS realm, there's really no reason to run public CAs. We know we have to get the client certificate on there. In doing so, we can certainly get the server cert on there. And nothing against the public CAs, but that gives us more control over the CA. So we had untold customers that when the CAs changed from 1024-bit to 2048-bit, they were just blindsided because the chains changed. Web world, that works perfectly fine. Nobody cares. Just throw the certificates on the server. It works. 802.1x doesn't work that way. CAs don't always understand that. We recommend putting up a code signing certificate. That'll change, particularly like with Apple, it'll just change it from unsigned to verified. But that's optional. You don't have to if you don't want to. So at this point, the system's initialized. We kind of have the basic information we need. And kind of the key information is we've set up our CAs. So here's our root. Here's our intermediate. At this point, we don't have any templates other than our server template, which we've created behind the scenes to issue our radio server cert. And so we're ready to set up the system. And so the heart of the system, along with the certificates, is the workflow engine. And the idea is that you have about a dozen different building blocks, and you just start plugging in those building blocks. So we'll build out we'll start with a typical BYOD use case. So we'll bring in a use policy. And you can customize all the screen information, both the look and feel as well as wording and so forth. But I'll leave everything just kind of defaults to get through this quickly. So now we got our AUP. Next step, we'll go ahead and authenticate against a radius or a server. We can do Active Directory, LDAP, AAA. In this case, I have that AD server already defined, so I'll just use it. You can certainly add more as you need. This is kind of the UI portion of that credential prompt. Again, we'll just leave it the defaults. So now we have a user that's going to come in. They're going to see an AUP. Once they accept that, they're going to be prompted for credentials. So let's do something fancy like limit the number of certificates, the number of devices they can have. So we'll ask about concurrent devices. And there's two different ways we can do this. We can have a hard limit or a soft limit. And so and they map to this display threshold and maximum threshold. Display threshold is how many certificates or how many devices does the user have to have before we start bugging them? That could be 1, it could be 5, The second number is how many certificates do we cap the user at? And you can zero those out if you don't want to enforce one or the other. And what that allows us to do is, there's sort of this idea that users should go somewhere and manage themselves, and they're going to go to a portal and log in, and there they can see their devices and they can remove devices or whatever. Like, we don't think that model works. Like, that's not how users think, right? So the reality is the user loses their iPhone, they go buy a new one, they bring it in to enroll it, and now we see them coming through the enrollment process. We know they had an old iPhone or 3 old devices. Like, we can just put a screen in front of them that says, and this is a hard one to mimic because I don't have 3 devices running, but we can just put a screen in front of them that says, hey, here's the devices you've previously registered. And if they've only hit the display threshold, we're not going to require them to remove any. We're just, hey, can we clean up any of these? And then if they've hit their max, then we're going to stick there until they've removed one. So we'll go ahead and save that with the defaults of 2 and 3. So now this is our process they're going to go through. Things are things are getting scrunched in. So now let's figure out where we want to move that user to. And so at this point, we don't have any configurations on here, but we do want to configure the device, so we'll create a new device configuration. And if you're an XpressConnect Wizard customer, this will all look very familiar. This is the same sort of workflow we have in the admin console, which is the hosted portion of the Wizard. And so we'll just call this our demo. Actually, let me just name it the same as the SSID, so we're talking about the same thing. It can certainly be called something different, but it's kind of nice to have it the same. So let's call this Cloudpath demo. This is our wireless network. Set up parameters around it. Conflicting SSID. So one of the things that always annoyed people was once users have joined other SSIDs, how do we keep them on secure SSID? secure SSID has authentication, all this stuff going on, and sort of hiccup. All of a sudden the device moves on and joins an open SSID somewhere. Conflicting SSID is an idea we came up with in the very early days to coerce a device to stay connected to the SSID we want. So, for example, if we're using the onboarding or guest SSID, we can set it up as what we call conflicting SSID, and depending on the OS, there's different mechanisms we use, but essentially we'll, like in Windows, we'll change it from join auto or auto join automatically to join manually, and that the SSID is still there, but the device isn't going to roam to it, so there's less likelihood that they're going to roam away from the secure SSID to the open SSID. So next screen here is just what devices do we want to support. These are the ones that we support. The top ones are things we automate. The bottom ones are the things we create click-throughs for the user to get certificates and screenshots of what they should expect. There's a likelihood that Windows RT may move up into the top, but we're constantly trying to move stuff up the stack as much as we can. So we want to support everything. Also, at the same time, we want to support everything, and this gets more in the wizard side of things, but when I run the wizard, you'll see that it'll load via Java applet, but we only use applet because it's there for convenience sake. So if the applet's there, great. That's a good loading experience. At the same time, we'll use ActiveX if it's available, because hey, it's available. But there's also a native option, so they can just download it and run it. So we try to balance and say we want one model that's completely native, so there's no dependencies on it, and we want one model that is sort of the optimized experience. So we'll go ahead with those. We're using the onboard radius server, so it already knows server cert and all that stuff. If not, we just need to let it know that information. There's all sorts of other settings in XpressConnect, and these are just the ones that boil up as the most common. These are kind of the NAC type settings, web proxies, passcodes, and so forth. When you get in the details, there's, I don't know, there's tons of things you can check for, and it's not that you'd use those all the time. Some of those are just issues that creep up. Like the other day we were troubleshooting 8.1 devices with PMK where we needed to turn off PMK. Like, we wouldn't want it off all the time, but for these devices, it makes sense to turn it off and let the device work. So we want to have all those Swiss Army knife capabilities. Next thing is, is this device going to be issued a certificate? Yeah, we want to issue it a device certificate. We'll do it off our intermediate CA. That's best practice. And then here we get into actually setting up our certificate template. In this case, we're going to do a client cert. Down the page would be a server cert option. And then we just get into kind of how we're going to decorate the username, how long it's going to be good for, and so forth. And this is just the things most people care about. You can check the advanced options there, and we'll go into another screen, which I'll go into later, but that gives you full control. So the thing we always balance is we want someone who understands nothing about the technology but has a desire to move to security, but needs to do so in the least overhead possible. We want it to be drop dead simple for them. At the same time, if you're an expert in the field and you want control over every little switch and knob, we want to give you that same control. And I think that's something we've always done a really good job of balancing. Down here in the middle, you'll see the notifications. These are just some stock ones you can pull in easily. You can define as many later, individually as you need to. You can change all the parameters around it, messages, time frames, so forth. And then since we're using the onboard radius server, we can assign the VLAN filter ID. And so we'll just go ahead and give it a VLAN here. And so at this point, we're going to put the user through the AUP, prompt the user for their domain credentials, check that they have other devices, move them to Cloudpath demo, give them a certificate from this template. And to expose that to the user, we just go through a process we call creating a snapshot. This is a really cool mechanism that has its legacy back to how we created a mixed mode of cloud versus local deployments with the wizard. And we were able to sort of move management into one space, push a button, create a big tar package that's everything optimized for the runtime experience, push that off for the runtime experience. So it's very low overhead. We're not having to do database lookups to render the page and so forth. It's all just optimized in that package. So this does take a minute or so here to build. And but once it's done, we'll switch over and actually see the user experience. And I have a little Netgear AP here, so I tried to stay vendor neutral, so I went with just a consumer grade AP. And
When you get to that point, can you make sure you talk about the Java versus non-Java implications? A couple of people are twittering that.
okay, yeah, definitely. So now we'll switch over to user experience. You know, again, users would either be coming from like onboard.company.com if you just want to do it via the web. You can also do it off the local onboarding SSID of whatever nature guest, so forth. And you can mix the two, right? And you can put the same policy or the same workflow on both, or you can have different. So we have places where there's different workflow if you're coming remote versus on-site. So this is the AUP. This is the default look and feel that's generated. You got full control over everything, both look and feel-wise as well as text and so forth. But we'll go ahead and click through, accept the AUP. We'll go ahead and authenticate here as Bob. We know what happens with passwords, so we'll try again. So at this point, it's checked. I didn't have any previous devices, so it didn't prompt me for anything. At this point, I'm authorized and authenticated to get on the network as BYOD. And so in this case, I have a Java on the machine, so it's loading via Java. Goes ahead and kicks in. This is an OS prompt, and so it's just going to verify that it's okay to put that CA in there. It'll go ahead and generate the certificate, set up the SSID, move them over, make sure we authenticate, make sure we get an IP address. Now the user's on the TLS network.
Nice.
Now at the same time, so we went through a flow that involved Java applet. That's the default configuration. If they have Java, we'll try it. If they have ActiveX, then we'll try it. That'll be the next preference. Worst case scenario, they'll fall back to here, which is what we call the download page. This is where they can download just a native EXE. Same thing on the Apple side. They can download a native app .zip file. And Android, they can grab the application from the Google Marketplace, Amazon Marketplace, or off the local server doing a local install.
You see many issues, I think, traditionally when I've got to download something via, just over the years, Java or ActiveX. How often I get to this having to go to this point. I've got the wrong Java, and Java's been the classic pain in the bum,
Yeah, and it's actually something we've adjusted quite a bit lately. And so one of the controls that we currently don't have on the wizard side, but will be there pretty quickly, and that we've just added on this side with this release is you can change those preferences. And so, some environments Java then download is a good combination. Other environments just say all I want to do is just go to the download page, and so you can flip that switch and control it back and forth based on personal preference. But yeah, the whole, and particularly on the Mac side, they've the whole handoff of Java from Apple to Sun and now OpenJDK, there's just weird things that went on there, and so we had to keep updating stuff. And really what we want is, we don't want to just show them the applet page and be like, too bad you don't have Java, but you're stuck at this page. Now you can click manual download. We try to determine that automatically, so people that don't qualify, we just move on. Or if we can do some checks to if we think it's going to work, based on known issues and whatnot. And so, if we think there's doubt that it's going to work, we'll take them here. If not, we'll try to use those mechanisms. At the same time, you can turn them off. So now we've gone through, we've created a CA, we've created a workflow that restricted people to BYOD. We've put a user on TLS. And so operationally, if we come back in here, now we've got this record of who that user is and what the device is. So we got our AD information, a snapshot of their AD info. We got details on their device. And so it varies depending on the OS, but like in this case with Windows, we'll grab some browser information, grab some OS information, grab NIC information. With our NAC capabilities, we can have it report back and make sure that yes, this user did have AV, or AV wasn't required; it was optional, which is another concept we have. Like we can suggest the user meet best practice, but not require it. And so we can offer them AV, but as an administrator, you can say whether that's required or optional. And then, for example, if they say it's optional, then we can report back that, okay, they don't have AV versus these other devices that did. And we've had universities use that as criteria that said, if you call a support desk and you didn't accept AV, you're lower priority than someone that we know has AV.
You could use this to get the wireless chipset of all of your devices then? Like a search database to get this information?
Yeah. I mean, iOS is the one where we have the least visibility. Android, we have good visibility down to kind of the chipset level. Windows, we have visibility down to the driver version. Mac laptops, we have visibility down to kind of the wireless or the wireless NIC model.
So earlier you had said something, you kind of compared this ADE process is not client device management.
Right.
This looks very management-esque.
Yes. We like to look at it as we'll bring you all the things you like about management without the things you hate about management. So we'll enable the device to behave, give you the visibility you want, all that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, we don't have to control that device kind of from the device perspective. We don't have to have an agent on the device. We don't have to, like in the MDM, the on-agent MDM situation, we don't have to have them join the domain, right? Like the old Windows domain, you can only join one. Now with MDM, you can only join one. And so we like to look at it as, it's not all or nothing. So for example, like an employee bringing in their own device, you may have multiple BYOD policies because that user is going to have multiple devices, right? They're going to come in with their phone, which is kind of the situation people are thinking about right now with MDM is they're going to come in with their phone and they probably want to check email on their phone because now we're getting into where devices have different purposes and whatnot. And so they're going to want Wi-Fi on their phone, but they're also going to want email. And for that, we can certainly have them jump across additional hurdles. So, okay, you want Active Sync turned on, you've got to, okay, maybe we don't allow Android devices, we only allow iOS, or only certain groups in our AD infrastructure are allowed to do that. But the user can, if we set it up to allow them to choose, we can allow them to choose, do you want least privilege, in which case you get on easily, or do you want most privilege, where you have some additional hurdles, and oh, by the way, here's the hurdles you're gonna have to jump through. And we can also have multiple options in between. But the idea is that we don't have to make this decision where the device is either not privileged at all or fully privileged. We can say, this particular device, we're going to treat it as internet only, but it's a employee, so we don't want passwords on there, so we'll burn in the certificate, but the certificate's only good for wireless. But if they have their management approval, then they can have Active Sync on their device. But in doing so, they're going to have to provide a one-time password or some other mechanism to kind of clear that additional hurdle. And I think that'll become clear as I start to build out the workflow wider. But yeah, definitely, we don't see enablement as like the little sibling to management. We see it as the same capabilities created in a different model that matches with personal devices. So this is the raw information about the certificate we issued to that device. During that process, it generated a CSR on the device, sent the CSR over, kept the private key local. Public cert came back down, they got married up, they went in the key store, SSID set up, got linked together, and that's what got used. If you wanted to kick off this individual device, we could revoke it right here. If we wanted to kick off Bob as a user, we could do that at his user level. That would kick off all his devices and prevent him from logging in again. So going back down to the workflow, the next example would probably be bringing in guest users. And so this introduces the idea of a branch, and there's two ways we can branch. We can branch with visual selection, where we ask the user employee versus guest. We can also do it automated, where we look at rules and whatnot to do it. In this case, we'll just do a visual selection. So we'll split the user into different processes. We'll just call this one user type for reference sake. And we'll make this first one employee and the second one guest. So now we've got a branch. So the user, as they go through the workflow, is going to see this screen, and we can pretty it up and put some more text in there and whatnot. And normally this would have some smaller text in there that say, select this option if you're an employee. You'll be required to authenticate to AD. If you're not, and then guest would be, if you're not an employee, click here type of thing. But this is what an employee is going to go through once they once they select, on the guest side, we can put in whatever we want. So we'll start off with, let's do sponsorship. So we'll set it up for sponsorship. So we're going to pull in a voucher. And so there's a plugin called Voucher. And now we just need to create kind of a database of vouchers. So this is our sponsored users. You can control length and all that stuff. In this particular case, we want this to be sponsored. So we'll give people the option through AD to log in. We can match on username, user DN, group, so some flexibility there. And it says LDAP, but that's also Active Directory. It can also be done through AAA. The one limitation with AAA is we assume it's like a TACX server and it's administrators only. And so there's no additional criteria. We can show what fields to display, and I'll add one here, which is days of access. So one of the cool things is we can allow the sponsor to choose within some confines how long that user is allowed to be on the network for. So we can say that by default, they're going to be on the network for, in this case, we have it defaulting to 0, but so we're going to allow them to choose between 0 to 7 days. So we could say from 0 to 90 days, whatever you want to delegate, we'll let that administrator make the choice. This is just the UI prompt for the end user, so we'll go ahead and use the defaults there. Now we've got this workflow, so all we need to do is pull in our actual device configuration. So again, if you want to use a separate SSID or a different configuration set, you certainly can, but we'll just pull in our same one. We'll go ahead and create a new template because we really want to apply a different policy to this. Again, we'll issue it off our intermediate CA. This one we'll flag as being a guest, and instead of putting them on the network for a year, they're a sponsored guest. So we'll default to a month, but then we'll let the sponsor choose. And then we can set up our notifications and so forth. But we'll go ahead and save that. Now we've got this. Now as a user comes through, I'll go ahead and create this snapshot so that gets published. While that's running, I'll jump over to the sponsorship portal. And so this is where a sponsor would come in. And so we'll just go ahead and log in here. And so at this point, Bob's allowed to create a voucher. If you're handling like a conference and need to upload a spreadsheet, you can. There's a couple different ways you can do batch things. You can upload a CSV template, which is nice because you control everything. Or you can just tell us, hey, go create 500 vouchers. Let me download them, and then I'll distribute them separately. If you upload the CSV, we'll also take care of email or SMS if you give us that information. So instead of you giving them, transporting it, you can just let us transport it to them. So we'll just call this our test user. We won't put in email or SMS, and so it'll just show us the voucher here, and so we can transport it to the user manually. So now this is a valid voucher. Let me go back here. Now our snapshot's done. So we'll refresh our user experience. Now as the user comes through again, we have that AUP. Now we've added the step where we're going to separate them out, employee versus guest. Guest is going to get the prompt for the voucher. Go ahead and put that in. Now they're authorized. Now they're going to move on the same way we did before. The only difference you're going to see is on the last screen, it's going to say we didn't have to change configuration because we already have the configuration correct. So one of the cool things the Wizard does is it diffs everything. And so it actually knows what it needs to change to make that application. So it's rather than just kind of ripping stuff out and shoving it in, we want to be smart about it. So user's back on. Now they're on as a guest user. Now you have that separate control. And really in that workflow engine, then you're able to go through and just kind of build out, whatever you need to in terms of workflow. And normally on day one, it's very simple. Over time, it becomes much more complex. The idea is all those use cases you kind of keep in the back of your head, or create separate processes for. You can just plug in. And with these splits, you can also put rules around it. So this particular one we just treated as a visual selection, but we can put rules around who the user is, what the group information is, what the device is, where they're coming from, things like that. So we can make options say disappear if they're coming from off campus, but available if they're on campus. Or maybe your IT provisioning capabilities are only available on site. They just disappear if you're off site.
Do you have the ability to put custom like attributes in for my Radius server? If I want to pass a particular attribute, say embed that into the certificate name, pass that forward into.
Not today with Radius, but with it's something we want to add to be able to map the attributes. But like the similar type of thing would be an LDAP, where we know there's 30 different fields commonly in LDAP, city, state, office, that type of information. So if you want to pull those in, we can map the fields, and then those become variables, and then you can use those variables throughout the system, whether that's displaying a message to the user, sending them an email, putting it in the certificate. All that sort of thing. Just real quickly to wrap up here, these are the types of building blocks you can use to build out. So acceptable use policy, we saw local server, AD, LDAP, AAA. Concurrent devices we saw. In this case, it's disabled because where I click to inserts before an authentication, so we don't have any sort of identity to tie it to. Splitting users into different branches, whether visual or automated. One of the cool things with those branches too is you can turn them on and off. And so let's say you you have a university and you have a conference center, and that conference center, like once a month you have people come in for a conference, let's say. So you want a branch within your workflow to handle conference scenarios. Maybe that's uploading a spreadsheet of CSV, or maybe it's just a secret of the day you put on the wall, or Facebook, or just click to join, whatever the case may be. But the other 29 days when the people aren't around, you want that to go away. You just go in and uncheck that option in the branch, and now it visually goes away from the user. You didn't have to change your infrastructure. You didn't have to change your support processes or anything. It's just that option's not available today. Authenticating to a third party. Normally this breaks into 3 different groups: social media, so for guest user situations. The second one is Gmail. So as like K through 12 moves to Gmail, you can authenticate to Google as your essentially AD in the cloud, if you will. And then the third one's OAuth. So you can plug in custom OAuth credentials. So if you're like a retailer that has a loyalty database, a loyalty website, and those identities are tied up in a web server, there's all these identities tied up in web servers that have never been able to be bridged into wireless security. And this gives us that ability to bridge. So now we can pull those identities in, capture what we need to, derive the certificate separate from generating a username and password. Voucher is one-time password that can be IT-driven or sponsor-driven. Out-of-band verification is where we send an email or SMS. They end up with a one-time password they can come back and use. Registering device for Mac-based authentication. So the reality is not all devices support WPA2 Enterprise. As much as we continue to push on vendors and help them to do so, gaming devices are the prime example. And so we can create workflows where, and the other situation is if you just want to truly leave them on the open SSID. So if you create a workflow where you have like a short-term guest and you want to give them option to stand on open or go to secure, the open SSID, we can use Mac registration and essentially authenticate the user back to the captive portal. We can do the same thing like for a gaming device, capture the MAC address and then register it. And then we can do give them the PSK and then use MAC filtering along with the PSK. And that's just kind of all automated, built in. So, and then as you go through that workflow, there's rules to say, okay, if it looks like a gaming device, put it down the path where they get MAC registered and shown the PSK. If not, put them down the normal workflow. Display a message, just redirect the user, prompt the user for information. That's where we can just ask for additional bits of info, and then secret of the day. And these can all be used not just individually, but combined together. So let me jump back to my PowerPoint and just make sure I didn't miss anything here. This one I'm kind of curious about. So one of the things we hear from customers when they first see the product is they sort of hear that CAs take a lot of horsepower. That does this scale and so forth. And so we get the question, how quickly can I onboard people? And these numbers are raw. We haven't formalized them. So we're about 2 weeks away from our 3.0 release, which is what I was showing you here today. And then, so in 2 weeks, this will be GA now. Right now it's in betas and release candidate form. But, and so we're still doing load testing, but just raw numbers are, on a server, on a VM where we give it 12 gigs of RAM, 2 virtual CPUs, 4 virtual cores. Just a run-of-the-mill server, Dell R720, a couple $1,000 server. We're able to just blast the server and get 10,000. Again, I hate putting asterisks on stuff, but at this time it's not yet official. But like generate 10,000 certificates. So even if you say, okay, well that's 10x what what we officially state, it's still you're generating thousands of certificates a minute. It can handle huge huge bursts of activity. And there's so that myth that CA you have to go build an entire build a building and create a lot of infrastructure to support it just isn't the case, and we can it can handle that burst like in a university situation where students come in, and then on the back end we take care of a lot of the work up front, so your radius server really gets minimized down, and it it's a very quick authentication that occurs.
So it's an appliance, essentially a VM.
Yeah, we kind of refer to it as a virtual appliance. It's it's all self-contained, but we don't want to ship you hardware. Just throw it on your VM. The really cool thing there is we have options in terms of HA, and so there's one option where you say, okay, my VM infrastructure is all HA to start with. Like, great, we don't have to charge you a dime. Just throw it in there. You're all taken care of. But then at the same time, we can do clustering, and so it's not just active-active, but it's like web technology, right? You can cluster it. And so if you want to put one in your European data center, one in Asia data center, one in the US, we can cluster those together, and now you've got geographic dispersion and load balance and all that sort of thing.
And how are product updates handled, including like the underlying operating system? Is it a GUI click to update, reboot the VM done, or do you have to deal with underlying patch management? What's the?
No, yeah. So we take the onus all on us. So it's you see it in the UI. You click the button. I'd love to say it works. That you never have to get on console, but it's software. So there's been times where we've had to get on console or whatever. But yeah, you push the button. We'll take care of the OS updates. We keep it up to date from a security perspective. So it's just rock solid. That'll take care of the application updates and so forth. And one thing along those lines too is one model we've always had, and one mantra that we have internally is like, we don't want customers ever to have to rebuy functionality. So over the last several years, people have repurchased Radius several times, and so our customers that, with the Wizard and now with ES, we just include updates. So the Wizard, I think we've done, over the last 7 years, I think we've done 150 plus updates to the software, and we have customers that are on subscription, so they technically repay every year, but the subscription model, but then, if you've bought a license outright, there's never a point where we say, oh, guess what? We decided to go from 3.0 to 4.0, and now you have to pay us more. We just include all updates. It's just kind of, and so then even like with the move from Wizard to ES, the people who have bought Wizard, they still get credit back for what they paid for ES for their Wizard. I'm sorry, I reversed them. They get credit for their Wizard purchase. When they upgrade to the ES. And
so then how is the product licensed, and then how is the support licensed? Is it number of users, certificates, servers, devices?
So in universities we do, it's just all you can eat based on the size of the institution. And so we take your FTE type number and say, and we have a series of tiers and say, okay, if you're 20,000 students, and then here's the price. And that's good for whether your students have 10 devices or one device, whether you use it for guest users. Essentially, we want to create an environment where once they start using the product, they use it for more devices. They don't restrict security to particular devices. In enterprise, we've had a harder time right-sizing licensing models, because some environments are like, hey, I only have a few hundred managers that are going to have one device, and others are like, I have 80,000 employees that are going to have 2 devices. And so for enterprise, we do per device. It's technically a per active certificate. So we monitor the life cycle. So once it expires, it goes back in the bucket. If we see the device goes away, it goes back in the bucket. I think the per device price is nominal. We don't want it to be like an MDM price point. So there's little incremental cost, but at the same time, it's fairly nominal for that environment, and that really allows us to scale it from small environments that are looking to do a small density to large environments that do high density.
You also have options for K-12?
Yeah, K-3.
By school or by district?
Yeah, K-12 we do the same type of EDU type pricing where you can say, it sort of comes down to predictability. Like universities, we know that, if you have 20,000 students, they're going to have 3 or 4 devices per student. Like that's fairly predictable. In the early days, it was much more random. We'd have people that were like, oh, I only have Wi-Fi in one building. But now it's so uniform. We're able to say if we know the size of the university, we know what a fair price is. Enterprise, like I said, is sort of still in that what universities were 5 years ago. So they're more random, and so that's why we get into the per device type stuff there. But
So you started out in education, I guess, was your biggest market, and probably still is.
I would say in terms of customer count, yeah, university is probably still the highest customer count. We just have so many long-term deployments in those environments.
In a more traditional corporate enterprise then, where today they might be looking at, I guess the big examples are ICE and ClearPass, if they're using those vendors, or even if they're not, what can you offer above those? What's the differential?
What's the differential? So ICE, it comes down to a lot of places we go in next to ICE Basic, right? Because that's just ACS. You don't start to get onboarding in their system until you're in ICE Advanced. At the same time, which is a huge price difference. At the same time, we've got big Fortune 500 customers that have bought ICE Advanced, and they're just like, the onboarding doesn't meet what I need it to do. It's one of those areas where there's a price for the product, and then there's a price for not having the product. And the price for not having the product can quickly outweigh the cost of the product. I mean, it's the ROI story, right? It's an uncapped support costs. And so if you look at it, and so like for ICE in particular, their model, like when they start to talk about certificates, they say, okay, certificates that are coming from Microsoft CA, right? So first they're going through SCEP, so we're back to SCEP admin, or they're going through Indes, which is the SCEP implementation. So they're going there. They're turning on, they're adjusting the flags to allow them to pass in the server name. At the end of the day, Microsoft CA is the one deciding what certificate to give them, and all it cares is about username and password, so it can't differentiate. And so now all you've really done is created the PEEP model with certificates. You put in your employee credentials, they go to Microsoft CA, everybody gets back the same type of certificate, and you can't differentiate. And it's very narrowly focused at the employee situation, and so it doesn't...
Where you guys were a couple of years ago, or several years ago.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. The limitation with PEEP was, and maybe I should rephrase that, the limitations with that user-centric model, and PEEP is the easiest way to say that, but TLS can be incorrectly implemented to do the same. But the limitation there is, you fall into that bounds where security is really limited to a particular, to those AD users, and you can't differentiate a personal device from an IT asset.